Okay, so I'm going to talk in general about survival and overwintering, and I am the fruit pathologist, so I'm doing all of this from a fruit perspective, but still I'm generalizing. And so this is more of a thought experiment for everybody, more than specific diseases and what you're going to see. So as you've probably heard throughout this series and throughout all of your careers, that disease-causing agents, or what plant pathologists call plant pathogens, are bacteria, fungi, water molds, viruses, nematodes. So about 85% of the disease agents that we see are fungi, particularly in fruit crops. That will definitely hold true. So that's what I'm talking about as I go through here. And we're gonna kind of start thinking about how these pathogens are lingering in our orchards or in our fruit plantings. So where do these pathogens come from? Well, they can come in with your planting stock, especially if they are host specific. Other pathogens are more ubiquitous, so they'll affect a wide range of different kinds of plants, different types of hosts, weeds, etc. So they can come in from nearby plants, whether that's weeds or other crops, previous crops in a rotation. So sources of pathogens can come from a lot of different places. And again, I'm generalizing. This is kind of an umbrella statement. So there are a lot of different pathogens out there and a lot of different systems and approaches that they can come at our orchards or our planting. So just in general, that's kind of how we stand. By the way, this is Fusicoccum on blueberry. So how do pathogens survive in the orchard? How do they persist? What's going on? And there are a lot of mechanisms at work here as well. So just think of this, that there can be one of these or multiple approaches. Some pathogens will survive in a saprophytic stage. So they can survive by consuming and getting their nutrition from already dead or already broken down matter. So they don't need a host per se to complete or to sustain their life. So they can just hang out and wait for your next crop to come in. Other pathogens will utilize something like a green bridge or another crop, whether they're aggressively pathogenic or it's just enough to sustain them until a more favorable crop comes in. And what we're going to be talking about today, though, or what I am specifically talking about, particularly when it comes to the most common pathogens that we do see on fruit crops, or that they can produce some type of survival structure, some type of overwintering or oversummering structure that makes them more drought tolerant or cold tolerant or UV tolerant. And so that's the way a lot of these pathogens will hibernate, if you will, from one season to the next. That's how they hang around until you get your other crop in. And that's a lot of times what we call overwintering. So when we kind of use that term really loosely, we're typically talking about that, but there are a lot of ways these pathogens can hang around. So where do these pathogens overwinter? Where do they survive from season to season, if you will? So what part of the orchard, what part of the plant? First of all, leaves. So a leaf spot disease or a leaf disease typically will overwinter in fallen leaf debris or any kind of leaf debris. So it hangs out on the floor of the orchard, or it hangs out in a bed or a field, waiting until next spring, for example, when the spores that are released can splash up into the healthy canopy of a new crop or newly emerging leaves. So leaf debris is a really common cycle. In terms of fruit, your fruit rots, typically those pathogens are going to overwinter in fruit, in spent fruit and diseased fruit. So this is a bitter rot example. So the fruit fall to the ground, and we know that the bitter rot pathogens can overwinter on the orchard floor, and again next spring splash right back up into the canopy just at or after flowering and infect healthy fruit, healthy susceptible fruit. Fruit mummies or spent fruit, that are hanging in the tree. Those can also be sources for inoculum. Those pathogens can overwinter as in trees, as whatever that survival structure is, or as mycelia. They can hang there and they can wait until next year. And we do have confirmation of this as well in some research that we've done. So fruit mummies are a really big deal in terms of surviving. Stems and branches, you might not see this as much in vegetable crops, for example. We see it a lot more in ornamental crops, but perennial crops, woody crops, can harbor pathogens in stems and branches. So this example, this photograph is fire blight, but we have a lot of pathogens that do cause stem and branch cankers, twig blights, and that is going to be the site of that overwintering. In addition, some of your pathogens like the bitter rot, Colototricum pathogen, will overwinter in a canker of a different disease. So we see the Colototricum or the bitter rot pathogen overwintering in fire blight cankers and in the black rot cankers. This is black rot. Black rot cankers, this is on apple. This is a more ubiquitous pathogen, and we call this a perennial canker because every year it expands. And this one can also cause a fruit rot. So kind of a more complex cycle, but all the same, this is the site for overwintering exactly in this branch where infection occurs. That's where overwintering will occur. Okay, so roots and soil. Pathogens can overwinter. Root rot pathogens, crown rot pathogens, soil-borne pathogens will overwinter in the soil, whether it's in root mass, root material, or as propagules that are detached and will remain in soils. So we see that particularly for root rot pathogens. Okay, so what does all this mean? We can talk about this, and as a nerdy pathologist, you know, we get excited about survival and overwintering, but our growers want to know, what does this mean for disease management? How is this, how are we going to put this information into the context of helping our growers manage disease? Well, it falls right into our cultural practices component. Okay, so our cultural practices are prevention and avoidance, sanitation, removal of infected plant material, rotations, resistant crops. That's where this overwintering matters, right? Because we know that we can remove these sources of inoculum so they cannot overwinter. We can use sanitation, we can use rotations, and we can plant resistant cultivars to break these cycles. And here is one of my favorite examples of sanitation. Apples falling to the ground and they need to be picked up, right? So a lot of overwintering potential right here in this image. And I know we like to show extreme examples. This is in our research orchard, but this is not atypical in a grower field if there's a disease outbreak. So here's kind of a last minute checklist. Strategies for managing plant diseases in the context of survival and overwintering. We're going to prevent it from coming in if that's possible, prevent infections, rogue any plants that are infected. Sometimes we just have to cut our losses, prune it out, rake it up, pick it up, clean it up. Sometimes tilling if it's like a leaf debris, and rotating through species or through cultivars that are not so susceptible to break that cycle. But just to know that there is an overwintering potential in most of our plant pathogens, particularly in the fruit world, that we have to consider that as we consider our risk for next year. So also remember, you as agents, that this is so the management through, or the context of survival and overwintering, is one part of a larger whole. Okay, so considering these cultural practices from that approach is part of more of a holistic management program. It's not going to stand alone, but then again, neither do fungicides. It has to be part of the whole. So a couple of other parting thoughts. Know that pathogens typically will build up from year to year if left unmanaged. So we'll start with low levels of disease, and we can very easily increase the amount of disease from year to year. How persistent it is will vary by the pathogen. How aggressive, how fast it spreads, all depending on the pathogen. So I'm generalizing here, but each disease has its own fact sheet, and we can help you through that. And also that inoculum overload, that we have too many of these fungal spores or out in the orchard, for example, fungicides cannot do their job. So we have to incorporate the reduction of inoculum so that our fungicides can work, if indeed our grower chooses to use fungicides. So what's your role as an agent? It's education, to help growers understand, even homeowners, help them understand what role sanitation and cultural practices play in a disease management scenario. And this, of course, is the IPM approach. This fits right into the IPM approach. We're integrating multiple strategies, including sanitation, including rotations, prevention, roguing, pruning. We're incorporating those into the whole, and that's what IPM means. It's the integration of all of the tools that we have. So how do you know? How do you know those specifics? Well, first of all, we have lots of resources. We have lots of fact sheets, and I will give a link. I will send a handout through the chat in a second. We have cultural calendars for commercial and for homeowners that we have just released in the last year or two. And of course, the specialists are here for you. That is why we're here, so that we can help you understand those cycles, and so you can communicate that better to your growers. All right. My contact information, it's always on the signature line of my emails. You're free to email me anytime, and my cell phone number is there. So I will be happy to take any questions.